And just at the moment, we have, I think, 9. I see Eris Weaver logging on right now. So I believe we have 9 members. So for the committee of the whole, I'll just name off the members that I see on the call right now. First, we have Tom Banning with the 3rd District, Willard Richards with League of Women Voters of Sonoma County, Chair Dennis Harder with Sonoma County Alliance, Mark Soyland with the 2nd District, Tom Conlin from the Sonoma County Conservation Coalition, Brian Ling with the 2nd District, David Oster with the 1st District, Rick Lutman with the Sonoma County Transportation and Land Use Coalition, Eris Weaver with the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. On staff, I'm Drew Nichols. I see Tanya Narath, Chris Barney, Shauna Gauze, David Ripperda, Dana Teray, Suzanne Smith, and James Cameron. And for guests, I see Orlando Ramirez from Caltrans. If I missed you, please speak up. Oh, my apologies, Brian. Brian's with the 4th District, not the 2nd.
This is Rick Lutman.
Hi, Rick.
You have me and Willard interchanged. He represents the Land Use Coalition. I represent the League of Women Voters.
My apologies, but I always confuse the two. I'll make note of that.
Job well done, Drew. Thank you very much. Was there any public comment that was received for this meeting?
I did not receive any public comment for this meeting.
Do any members of the committee have any public comment that they'd like to make?
I see
Seeing
Rick.
none or hearing none, we'll move forward.
Chair Harder. Oh, I see Rick Lutman with his hand up.
Rick, please.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to bring up a concern I have about the function of this committee. As I just mentioned, I'm serving as an appointee of the League of Women Voters of Sonoma County. And I find that being on this committee is not doing very much good. We very rarely have any action to take other than trivial things like approving the agenda and the minutes. We are never asked by the SCTA to express our opinion or give any advice, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. If one watches the SCTA meetings, there's never a report from us. There's never a mention of us. One would never know, looking just at the SCTA meetings, that there even is a Citizens Advisory Committee. I don't know what to do about that, but I think that there's something wrong with the system here. What do we do if we don't take action? Well, we sit and listen to long reports that frankly are very boring. Most of the information is already in the agenda packet. There's no particular reason to sit here and listen to it. And I think one of the reasons that we're having trouble getting a quorum is precisely this fact. The meetings are boring and they don't do anything. And I think it's going to get worse. This is the 3rd meeting out of the last 4 that we haven't had an agenda, haven't had a quorum. And it's getting worse if we have only 9 today, and that's not even close to a quorum. So I have brought this up with Drew, I brought it up with Dennis, I brought it up with Susan Gorin and Suzanne Smith. But other than the fact that we did see the SCTA draft agenda in our agenda today, which I suggested was a good idea, I don't see that much has changed. And as for that, the SCTA agenda is only in draft form at this point because the meeting's several weeks away. It might be better if we scheduled these meetings shortly before the SCTA, maybe the same day earlier, but also possibly the day before, so that we actually have a legitimate agenda, a finalized agenda, and at least we know what they're going to be talking about and we could express some opinions. But even that is not going to happen unless something is proactive about it. So I'd like to hear from other people on the committee and see if you agree that there's something we could do to make ourselves more relevant.
Rick, I'd be more than happy to take on that opportunity. This is what, your third meeting or fourth? I'm not sure, but right now we're in a phase of which we're in between action items and major action items. We, for years, have been working on Go Sonoma, which is the funding package. Prior to that was Measure M. We put together those packages, and our job is to make sure that those dollars are spent according to those plans. A lot of work, a lot of energy, and a lot of discussion has gone into those. So we're currently kind of in a lull, and I appreciate your comments. They are quite critical. I'm not sure how to make a meeting that's exciting for you. For me, I'd rather it not being a confrontational that I think you suggested, but again, each have their own opinions of what we think we should do. And so, but this committee in the past and in going forward has some very critical roles. And part of that will be whenever we're working on the funding and the programs and projects, they'll be covered under Go Sonoma. So that's my comment. And maybe this committee isn't for you. Maybe you need to look at another committee or something. I'm not sure, but the committee has functioned very well in my 35 years of serving on it. And that's kind of, we've gotten a lot of stuff taken care of within this county over those years. So, and there was a lot of the action of this committee that got that done. That's the end of my comment.
Dennis, would you like to entertain more conversation on
Oh,
this?
sure, absolutely. The floor is open, please.
Thank you. I would just add, Rick, I appreciate you bringing this comment forward. I agree with Dennis that maybe there is some difference in perspective based on the amount of time one serves on the committee. It definitely took me a long time to come up to speed to understand what little advisory role this committee may actually have with the board, but I do think that it does have some valuable function. So I'm not quite as pessimistic, I think, as you expressed. I think it's probably a good idea to see the SCTA draft agenda. I think that's a good improvement. I noticed that in the packet today. And I also would bring the perspective that I think we used to have a quorum, and we expanded the membership of the committee, which is, I think, had an effect on our numbers. So I think that I wasn't expecting that the lack of a quorum would be as persistent as it has been. So the fact that that continues might be something for us to revisit and discuss further. There, there's a lot of folks that, if you look at the agenda, the attendance log that's being tracked, there are certain groups that are just not participating repeatedly, and so maybe that questions whether they should be on the committee at all. So, but I still do think there is value in raising some concerns with staff and having those concerns thought through in advance of the board meetings. But yeah, we want to be relevant. I agree that there's sometimes a gap there.
Any other comments?
I see Willard raised his hand.
Yeah, this is Willard Richards. On today's agenda, we have an opportunity to comment on the Measure M annual report and help in the preparation of that document. So that's one place today where we do have input. One regret, or maybe I should say it differently. When I first joined this committee, I looked forward to be able to look over the financial statements and see that they complied with Measure M and were done properly. I quickly discovered that that's not a job for the neophyte, that the statements are long and complicated, and we've not many committee members look at them carefully. Dennis Harder being the exception, he does look at them. So that's an area where I think the Citizens Advisory Committee is falling short of its charter, or what it's supposed to be doing. But we do have the opportunity, I think, at any time to weigh in on an issue and provide advice to the SCTA and help the organization stay on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Willard. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll move to the agenda items that are presented. We currently, as Drew, just for confirmation, we currently have 10 members of the board, of the committee, I'm sorry. So we're just still lacking one person to make this an official meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. All right, moving on to, we're going to move right on to the Measure M information in the presentation. We had we have someone from Sonoma County Transportation Authority that'll make a presentation.
That'd be me, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Can I do that? Yes. Okay. That one. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes, clear.
Excellent. So as we do each month, SCTA brings forward a project sponsor to describe a Measure M project that receives funding in a given fiscal year. We try to schedule everyone who is in fact receiving funds either through a programming action in that fiscal year or is still receiving funds from a previous action to present those projects and how they are performing. This month it's my turn. SCTA is in fact responsible for implementing the project or the intersection improvements at Highway 116 and 121. So I'm just going to walk you through the project here real quick. The scope of work for that project is to convert the existing intersection of 116 and 121, and also one leg is a county road known as Bono Road in Sonoma County to multi-lane roundabout. The project will also relocate the existing park and ride lot from the southeast corner of the road right of way to the northeast quadrant outside of the traveled way, and add a shared use path and related facilities for pedestrian and bicyclists. Just to give you a better orientation of where we are in the county, this intersection is located southwest of the town of Sonoma at the intersection again of highways 116 and 121. And then Bono Road is off to the left here, heading west. To give you an aerial overview of the proposed project elements, this is showing how the roundabout will fit into the existing aerial photograph here. It shows that the park and ride lot will be located on the northeast corner, and I believe there will be 47 spots. Yes, 47 stalls, and there will be bus access through the park and ride lot, along with a multi-lane roundabout and bicycle and pedestrian facilities at each corner, in addition to lighting and signage. Now, the project has been in development for quite a while. We did the scoping pretty early in the fall of 2013, and then the environmental document took a while to be completed. That was in the spring, actually, I think it was April of 2018. And we are currently working on right-of-way and design. We have reached the first version of the 100% plans that have been submitted to Caltrans, and we are currently working on the comments that Caltrans provided and will be resubmitted to Caltrans and Caltrans headquarters in order to review that 100% design. We are also in the process of acquiring right-of-way. We are in negotiations with several of the property owners where we need to buy sliver takes. There are no full takes in any of the parcels that are affected by the project. Once we complete those, we will be what we call ready to list in the summer of 2022. Now, when we started this project, we weren't funded for construction, but because we had Measure M, we were able to move forward through the environmental and the design process, knowing that we would be able to match the funds that were spent early on in the environmental and design phases and in the construction phase once we secured construction funding. In doing so, we were very lucky to have been selected for the state transportation, what do we call it? The State Highway Operation and Protection Program, also known as the SHOP. And that's great. The project is fully funded through construction now. However, it did take us a while to get there. So the design, as I mentioned, the environmental and design phases have sort of been stretched out. So we are slightly over budget currently, but we expect that we have the funds to cover those overruns. So we do expect that ready to list is when the design is completed and has been reviewed and secured by Caltrans, and all of the right-of-way has been acquired and certified, and all the permits are in hand, and the project is ready to go out to bid. That's what ready to list means. And so that will happen in the summer of next year. Our SHOP funds are programmed in the fiscal year 22-23, and that starts on a state federal fiscal year. So it'll start July 1st. So those funds will be available in July. We hope to have a CTC action in August of 2022. And that would allow us to actually move to physical construction by spring, late or early spring. We'll call it early spring of 2023. That will be when construction actually starts. PG&E is currently in the process of relocating some gas line, and then they will still need to relocate some power lines that are out there. The funding, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, we spent about $1.8 million on the environmental phase. That was the contract that we had with Parsons. We did, in fact, spend another $150K that came from the county when SCTA decided to take over this project from County Transportation and Public Works. The county provided $150,000 to SCTA to get us through the scoping and the PID phase, the project initiation document phase of the project. We ended up not using all of that money, so we were able to apply some of that money to the environmental portion as well. We are currently under contract for just under $2 million for the design phase. We also have funding in the SHOP and in Measure M for the right-of-way phase, for the right-of-way acquisition that needs to happen. And all of the construction funding is coming from the SHOP. So this project, as I mentioned, is fully funded, and we currently have just a little over $1 million left in Measure M that we will be able to allocate to those cost overruns that we are anticipating. And then finally, this is an artist rendering. It's a landscape architect's design of what the project will look like when we're done. Some of you have seen this document before, but this is just to give you an idea. It is not to scale. It is not on the right-of-way line. So it is not meant to be an accurate depiction. However, it does give you an idea of what the final design will look like. There will be a gravel and river cobble scape through the center of the roundabout. There will be cobbles throughout the medians that will be slightly raised. That's meant to discourage people from crossing lanes and that sort of thing. This is the area up here at the top is where the park and ride lot will be, and there will be trees that are coming out as part of the construction that will be replanted as part of the landscaping of the park and ride lot. There are some trees that are being replanted here. These are not trees, these are bushes and a biofiltration area. And this does give you some idea of what the sidewalks will look like as well. And with that, that concludes my presentation on the 116-121. Mr. Chair, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Conlon first, and then Willard, and then Eris.
Thanks, Shauna. Appreciate the update on this. I was curious if you could go into the specifics of the Caltrans requested changes so that we can understand. I guess that had some impact on the budget, the design budget as well?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
Caltrans isn't asking for changes so much as they are making comments on the completeness of the design package that was submitted by the consultant. That is a regular occurrence. You're missing things here. This design is different. This specification is slightly changed, so you need to include this, quantity over here. Those are the kinds of comments that we're getting. It's not changing the overall project. And I would say that the length of time is what is the majority factor in the cost overruns, because we've had to sort of stretch out what would have possibly been accomplished in 12 to 18 months. But because it took us so long to find construction funding, Caltrans certainly wasn't in a hurry to get us to that end point, because they don't want to have designs and environmental documents go stale, or your right-of-way certification goes stale. So they're not anxious to get to that end point until construction funding is secured. So it was the stretching out of the environmental and the design phases that really, I think, is causing those overruns that we're having now.
Great. And then a quick follow-up. Is this cobblestone and the idea of these separators, these islands, is that a common design in?
I would not call it uncommon. It's an aesthetic. It's not really, it will be built to design standards.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Willard.
One thing that impresses me about this project is that it takes us a decade to improve an intersection. And as I watch this process for transportation projects, I'm beginning to wonder more and more, is there any way that we can streamline these projects? Is there any place where perhaps a revision in the way that we do things can reduce that time delay? That question might become more applicable now that we have the national infrastructure project passed and underway.
Well, that's an excellent question, and I'm glad you brought it up, Willard. We are in the process. I believe that we brought it to the Citizens Advisory Committee as an informational item, but the SCTA board recently approved a approach to funding projects called the 2021 funding program. And the idea behind it is that we have requested that all of the jurisdictions submit to us their 5 highest priority projects. And then SCTA is considering a number of different sources to apply to those projects, rather than release an individual call for projects for each separate funding source, which is kind of how we've done it in the past, because they're not all really exactly aligned. We're now trying to do it where we do one call and we fund as much as we can, as fully as we can. And then we also retain these priority projects that have presumably gone through council review. They've been through the technical advisory committee. They've been through a number of different revisions, and they've generally been out to the public on a number of occasions as well, either through a capital improvement program or a master plan or a general plan, some other form that is informing these jurisdictions what their priorities are. Then they give those to us, and then we are able to hopefully better fully fund the projects that we're looking at now. And so the SCTA staff is in the middle of reviewing those projects right now. And not Measure M, but Go Sonoma, which is slightly differently formatted, has the potential to fund some of those projects in the early years. 2 of the years that are included in the 5-year funding program that we are considering are in fact Go Sonoma.
I think my question was not so much aimed at funding a project. I think I understand that process, but more a comment on the environmental studies, the PAEED, the various stages of design that's required by Caltrans. Are all of those, are there any opportunities to shorten that process? Can we suggest something to our legislators to make things move more rapidly?
Sure. NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act streamlining, has been proposed in the past, and some of that has occurred at Caltrans, but Caltrans is a juggernaut, and it's super hard to move them just as one entity. I would agree with you, but I will say that having a fully funded project does help get it through the process faster. So if we are able to fully fund these projects, then Caltrans can see that end date, they can see it is fully funded, and then they'll move it to the top of their priority list. So having a fully funded project is really our best bet in getting these projects delivered more quickly.
And the Go Sonoma Act plus the Federal Infrastructure Act, both of those will help with that funding issue.
Yes, we expect so. That is our hope, absolutely. Did that answer your question, Willard?
Halfway. I think there's no really good answer to fully how to shorten that 10-year process. Getting the project funded early on is one thing you've mentioned, but all of the other steps have me wondering if we're really designed a system that's what we want. And early on, when anybody mentioned tinkering with NEPA or CEQA, I'd sort of have a knee-jerk reaction of, oh no, we can't do that. And that's beginning to soften now that I see how they work.
It can be a long, involved process, but if it's a fully funded project, then generally it gets pushed to a higher priority because it gets included in a work plan, particularly for Caltrans, that will move it forward faster. It's not ideal, I agree. Eris, I believe you were next, and then Musa, and then Steve Bertelbaum.
Yeah, I just have some questions. I'm kind of toggling back and forth between this image and, you know, the sort of aerial Google Maps of what's there currently. And so I have some questions about the bicycle and pedestrian improvements, which are pretty much close to non-existent right now. I mean, right now there's a crosswalk, I think, from the park and ride in the deli and not much else. And that artist drawing looked like it was adding sidewalks and several more crosswalks. So if you can, I don't know if you can zoom in on this image a little bit more, or just talk me through what's being added.
I don't have the ability to zoom here.
Okay.
I apologize. or if I do, I don't know how to make it work. So that's on the user. I apologize.
Okay.
But what I can do is point out that there are indeed sidewalks and refuge areas between. And it is expected that there is a pathway for bicyclists through the intersections. Now, it is also expected that that regular, or let's say experienced users, we'll call them the Lycra crowd, will likely bypass those in favor of remaining in the lanes. But there is a separate path provided for both bicyclists and pedestrians.
Okay. And so how far, along each of the four arms does the sidewalk go and the bike path go?
Truly just through the intersection. So I believe they start here and come over to here. They again come through
Okay.
here. You can sort of see lines. It's very tiny. I do apologize that I can't zoom in on it. And comes around here. There's the option of crossing here. So as I said, experienced users will likely bypass this because it would be kind of clunky to come in here and then cross here and then cross here and then cross here if you were trying to get it from here here.
Yeah,
But
no, I
there
was
is the
right through the
option.
roundabout. But I guess I'm curious about the pedestrian stuff, given that I don't think I've ever, in all my years of driving through this intersection, seen a pedestrian attempt to cross it or even
I
walking
have.
around area.
As a
Have you?
pedestrian,
Okay.
I have tried, because as it stands currently, there is a park and ride lot that occupies about this space in here. And and people do try to cross from here to the deli.
Yeah.
And they also try to cross from the park and ride lot to the Vineyard Inn. It is not uncommon for people who are staying at the Vineyard Inn to use the park and ride lot.
Yeah.
So there's not a large volume, but there are indeed pedestrians.
Okay. And so are there crosswalks at all four arms?
Yes.
Because it looked like only 3 on the other schematic, and I'm trying to.
There's one here.
Okay, so there are
There's
4.
one here. There's one here.
Okay.
And there's one here.
Okay,
Great.
great. Thank you.
I love it when I answer questions and they're done. Musa.
Sean, I have a question, in fact, about the operation of the parking lot. How will it operate? Is it a two-way or is it just a?
It is a
one-
it's a one-way in, one-way out, as I understand it.
So if
my
someone
expectation-
coming from like westbound 121,
West. bound.
yeah, they enter the.
They would come in here and out this way. I believe this is the
Then
in.
how
and this
they
is
can
out.
go back to their home from there, you know?
Now I have had this conversation and there is the
And
option.
the same thing, you know.
It's supposed to be
because-
right in, right out.
Yeah, but
So-
it is difficult, you know, to
Indeed.
operate this way
How do you turn
because.
around here to get back this way? I should know this answer, Musa, and I have had this conversation and I can't remember how it's supposed to operate. Because you will either be able to come across here and then come around,
Uh-huh.
because there won't be a solid barrier at this location. But or it will be two-way in and out. And I don't think that's the case because they're not looking for people to be doing left turns into, but it might be that it's right in on both directions.
Yeah, I
Right
don't
out.
think it is a full access because there is an island in the middle, you know,
No, there is no island.
So,
or the raised,
So
you
it's
know,
the-
what's this?
There's no
the
island.
raised-
Oh, yes, there's an island here, but I don't know. Yes, and it does extend here. I don't think it
Yeah.
extends on this side.
but how will people get into the lot from any other direction than coming westbound?
The
So-
intention
so
is
he-
to come through the roundabout and then pick the way that would get you the best in. And it will be
Let me-
signed.
I think
Let me
it is a
jump in
bad
for a minute.
design, you know, to be honest with you.
Let James answer the question. Hold on a
Okay.
second.
Go ahead, James.
So what we got is, so the park and ride itself, you can go either way, right? So you can so let's say you're on Highway 121 headed westbound, okay? And so that's, you're heading from the right side of your screen to your left side of the screen. You'd be able to turn into the first right into the park and ride, or you could go past that and then take your second right into the park and ride. So the park and ride is bi-directional within the park and ride itself. But the entrances, both entrances are right in, right out. So if you're heading back to Highway 116 Arnold Drive, you could exit out of that north entrance, make a right, and go home. If you wanted to go home from the headed back towards the Shellville area, you'd use that easterly exit. You'd make a right out, and then you would travel through the roundabout, going through the roundabout, doing a U-turn, and then head back out Highway 121 back. So that's how it'll function in its final configuration.
Okay, then it is a two-way, you know, like
Yeah, the park and ride itself is two-way. The entrances
Oh,
and
okay,
exits
got it.
are right in, right out.
Mm,
Thank you, James. I knew it worked. I just couldn't remember.
makes sense.
Okay, I think we now have Steve Bertelbaugh and then Tom Banning.
Thank you. You may have addressed this before I came on. I was a little late. This is a county project on a state highway, as I understand.
It is, but it is funded with State Highway Operation and Protection Program funds for construction. So Caltrans is the implementing agency for the construction phase.
And so that means that Caltrans will be handling all the construction management and that sort of thing. Okay.
Yes, with oversight from SCTA, but yes.
And so why doesn't Caltrans just do this from start to finish? How is it that we were able to leverage it?
It was an operation improvement, and it was not something that they wanted to invest in because the accident rates and the index that they call it, the accident index at the intersection didn't push it up into the safety threshold for the SHOP program. But once SCTA and the county funded the earlier portions, we were able to make the argument that Caltrans should include it in the SHOP, and there was capacity, and Caltrans agreed with us, and then it added it to the SHOP.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom.
I have a historic question. I think originally there were other designs being contemplated for this intersection. And then when the circular gets selected, how much influence does SCTA have on a design like this? As a RCPA, can you say we'd like this design because it has better environmental, in this case a traffic circle, better environmental benefits? I mean, do you have any sway? I'm also thinking like item 10 on our agenda after reading that article.
Forgive me, I'm not sure I'm getting exactly what your question is getting to, but SCTA partnered with Caltrans all the way through this process. So we did, we paid for, but Caltrans did oversight of the environmental document. We had a consultant write the document, and we looked at two different alternatives plus a no-build alternative. The first alternative was an intersection, and a signalized intersection, and the second was the roundabout. And SCTA was, the board was kept informed all through the process. They preferred the roundabout alternative, and we were able to express that preference. But the decision was made by what's called the project development team during the environmental phase, and that included the consultants and the regulatory agencies and the Caltrans environmental staff and SCTA and the county. There were a lot of different stakeholders that participated in that process in selecting the preferred alternative that was environmentally more friendly as the roundabout.
Okay, so SCTA's influence was more advisory, or do these different groups?
It was certainly taken into account, but it was part of a team.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving forward. Hey, Shauna, thank you for the great presentation, as always, very well done, and James and everybody else for the contribution and great questions from the committee. Appreciate all that. Now that we have a quorum, could we go back to item number 3A, and do I have someone that would make a motion to approve the September 27 minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor of accepting those, could please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Now we're going to go back to on our agenda, back in the order of item 5B. And again, this committee, part of its purpose was to be the oversight for Measure M. And this is our opportunity that we were given to have our input and review of Measure M. And so from there, we do have a great influence in what we do as a committee in moving forward. So from there, the draft was presented to us, and Shauna, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. There we go. So again, as our chair just so eloquently stated, the Citizens Advisory Committee is, I'm sorry, I see Tom's hand. Do you have another question, Tom, before I move on? No, okay, just checking. So the Citizens Advisory Committee is tasked with oversight of Measure M. As part of that responsibility, SCTA staff writes with the input from all of the project sponsors and Measure M recipients, the Measure M annual report, and then brings it to the Citizens Advisory Committee to review and establish that this is our report to the public on how Measure M was spent. So in the past, we had done that. It was, I mean, the very first year we did a Measure M annual report, it was a trifold brochure because it was so new and we had so little to say and we had just started collecting funds. But as we went forward, we started increasing the size of the document and we sort of changed the format over the years. And so now it comes to you in this format so that you have the opportunity to comment on the content before we bring you the polished document in January. So what we've provided to you is essentially the data, and that is a Adobe Acrobat PDF where you get to review the documents, text, and tables, and let us know if you have comments. I did receive a number of comments, so what I would like to do is sort of address those at a high level and let you know that we will be responding to you in writing for anybody who submitted comments to us. And I think that for the most part, we will be accepting almost all the comments. For those comments that we will not be accepting directly, I will give you the reason why. So, but let me first go through the document and sort of give you a rough outline of what this document is and how it works. So the executive summary is how it starts off. That covers each one of the programs within Measure M. So it starts off with the apportionment programs. Those are the ones where we just hand out the money to to the Measure M recipients on a formula basis. So that goes for local streets and roads rehabilitation and for local bus transit. Then we have the highway program and the local street projects program. Those are projects that were identified in the expenditure plan and voted on in 2004 when the measure was passed. So those are not changeable. We are unable to swap projects. We are unable to add projects to Measure M. Measure M was very project specific. So we address those individually. In this document, we address them as the projects that were receiving funds in this fiscal year. So there are Measure M projects that are not mentioned here. Those projects didn't receive funding in this fiscal year. And then finally, we have the rail program. And 5% of Measure M was set aside for the rail project before Measure Q was passed, and SMART had its own measure. Measure M was able to contribute 5%. However, it was very specific on what types of expenditures were eligible. So that does limit the way that we present what we talk about for SMART. The next is just sort of the next portion of the executive summary is where we go from here, and that of course is Go Sonoma. So Go Sonoma will pick off right where Measure M leaves off and take us into our next set of expenditures and funding for transportation. The next section is the revenue and disbursements. That shows you an overall summary of what each of the programs received and put out. And then there are a number of notes here. This always causes some consternation. We do find it very challenging to make these notes both understandable and brief, but we do work hard to do that. And so we appreciate your comments on that. Then each of the programs is detailed a little bit more than what is in the executive summary. So you will find that there is a table that shows you the expenditures in a given fiscal year. And then because the committee asked for it, we also provide a year to the, from beginning to the end of this fiscal year, cumulative totals for what has been dispersed in the LSR program. It's what's been dispersed versus what has been expended if we're in the local streets and road local projects or bike projects program. And then you will find a brief summary of how each of the jurisdictions spent their funds. This is dependent upon what we get from the jurisdictions. And it is not, it's not uniform. No matter how many times we ask, we do get different information from different jurisdictions. So then we move down to the, you'll see something very similar. It's a very similar format for the bus program. And then we move into the projects program. So there's an overview of Highway 101. And then once we get into the project specifics, then we provide an information sheet on each of the projects. That is meant to be very uniform so that everything is presented in the same format so that it's easier and more accessible. So you will find a project information sheet, and in the final version, you will find a map of the project and photos if we have them. So I think with that, that summarizes how the document is laid out. The document was mailed out to everybody, emailed out to everyone about 3 weeks ago now, and we give you about 2 weeks to review and provide us comments. We did receive a number of comments, as I mentioned, and we will be addressing those. I did receive some comments that I would like to look at specifically. So when we get down here to the Measure M information sheets on a given project, let's see, here we go. In any of the information sheets, the format is similar. So the project scope comes directly from the expenditure plan. This is how it was presented in text to the voters. So that part doesn't get changed. It's not always exactly current as as the measure has gone along, the projects have morphed slightly, but the projects have to, so you could describe them slightly differently now, but even though the projects that are being implemented fall within this project description, we sometimes would like to embellish what is in the project scope, but we don't change it because that is what the voters approved. So that's what's in the project scope. So we don't change that. The additional details is where we have the ability to provide some more of that excess information that we might be missing out of the project scope or like to see. And then the project status and schedule, you will find that if it is highlighted in gray, those are the sections of or phases of the project that have been delivered already versus the portions that are not highlighted, those are active and current. And then you will find that there is a summary of the appropriations and disbursements that happened in a given fiscal year. And then you will see an overall funding table that shows you the status of the funding through the measure. So with that, I would say that the only other thing I need to express is that as the projects are defined in the measure, that's what is eligible for funding. So if, say, for I did receive comments from Steve Bertelbaugh regarding SMART, and we would like to talk about the MUP and the bike path. However, the bike path is not eligible as part of what funds can be expended in Measure M for rail. However, there is also a discussion of the MUP, the Northwest Railroad right-of-way, where SMART also receives that funding, and they do spend that on the MUP. So I have tried to insert references to that information sheet to hopefully cover that concern. So with that, I will stop sharing and then turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, to talk about any questions that anybody might have. But hopefully I have addressed the comments that have come in so far.
Could you just address one more the timing? So from here, you're going to make some modifications to based on the suggestions that were made, and you're going to go ahead and get a draft that has the fine pictures and maps, correct?
That's right. And you'll receive that at your January meeting, January 29th, I think it is.
Right. Right.
And we would,
24.
unless there is something significant, and I haven't seen it yet in the comments that I received, but should the committee ever feel that there is something that is not being addressed, we do have the opportunity to schedule an interim meeting, which would happen in the middle of this month in order to try to address anything that hasn't been covered so far.
Correct.
If there is a special meeting necessary.
Correct.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Lutman has a question.
Mr. Lutman?
Thank you. So I think I understood you to say that the percentages that of Measure M funds that go to the various type of projects, the US 101 and railroad and bike paths and so on, those were set in the measure when it was passed by the voters.
That's correct.
And there was an original one and there was a renewal, and they're the same, aren't they? The percentages are the same.
So if by renewal you were referring to Go Sonoma, which was voted on in 2020, is that the renewal that you're referring to?
Yeah, wasn't that essentially an extension of?
Yes, that's correct. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. That does have slightly different percentages, and that won't start until 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
right now, this is just a report on what has actually been expended for Measure M funds that have currently been collected.
Well, the reason I asked is that I think we're beginning to realize with more and more urgency every day that we have historically been spending too much money on highways and not enough on rail and pedestrian and bike and bus and so on, and alternative methods of transportation. So we're now locked in for, what is it, 20 years? Spending 40% on US 101.
No, that's not accurate. Measure M is very different from Go Sonoma in that way. All of the funds that were dedicated to highway have been distributed throughout the other programs. So the programs have different names now, but there is a crosswalk that exists that could sort of explain which ones are which. But the highway funds, that 40% was redistributed into things like bike and ped and transit. I mean, I think we tripled transit and we doubled bike ped, more than doubled bike ped, and we are providing money for things that we don't even know yet, like new technologies. So that 40% funding is no longer going to highways.
Let me kind of interject here, Rick. They're completely two separate measures. Measure M that we're reviewing here are the set percentages that you see that were set in the measure. They're cut and dry, and that's our job, that we're to make sure that that's where those dollars are spent. Go Sonoma is a new measure. It has its own percentages and its own different measures to go forward. And that's the new 20-year funding plan. And that's not what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with Measure M, and that's our obligation to make sure that those dollars are spent according to what the voters passed back then, for. Hopefully that clears that up.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Are there any other comments?
I see Steve Bertelbaugh has his hand raised, Mr. Chair.
Steve?
I do understand that Measure M passed in 2004, which was a long time before SMART actually got going. It might be good to have an asterisk to explain that.
And I actually have a whole written response, and I am going to accept many of your comments, Steve. I just wanted to sort of explain what our limitations were on those sections.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Does the committee see the need for the extra meeting in December to review the revisions of this report? Seeing none at this point in time, unless something comes up, we'll assume. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Yes.
Great, thank you, Dennis. I had a couple of just observations. I didn't give myself enough time to review this as carefully as Steve did, but I noticed, well, first of all, Shauna, you're absolutely correct. Not all the jurisdictions report equally. Windsor barely reported anything this time and didn't do anything this time. And that kind of sticks out in the report, which is as it should be, I suppose. They didn't even report any interest on their funds that they've been sitting on. So also on that same page 13, I noticed that Measure M funded some disaster recovery for the LNU lightning fire and the glass fire. And I wanted to understand which bucket that came out of. And
what I would say is that is what the transit agencies reported to us that they used operational funds for, and those funds that Measure M provides go towards operations.
so that was transit specific. That was not
That's correct.
Rehabilitation. And maybe I didn't read carefully enough to notice that being clear in the file.
It's possible that if there were damages to roadways that, say, the county, who also puts their funds toward operations of the Public Works Department, used that funding in response to the fires, but it would have been out of their bucket that is for maintenance of the roads.
Okay. And then I appreciated your comments in response to Steve or earlier, and Steve's specific comments, which he sent to me as well. And right, I just had a little wordsmithing quibble with Steve's final sentence, with service to Healdsburg and Cloverdale expected subsequently. I think you'd be a little more clear about that, just to say contingent upon funding being approved or something more specific than just expected. So if you end up keeping Steve's recommendation there, I'd request just specificity around that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other comments? Seeing none, again, that's a lot of work, a lot of great reporting, a lot of ciphering, and I thank you in advance for all the hard work and effort that you put in. It's a great report. Someone who hasn't, had an opportunity to really keep abreast of Measure M and wanted to catch up on what was going on and how the measure originally started. It's a great document to read, and it should give you a firm foundation as to where it was, where it's going, and how it is today. So I thank you so much for that work.
Thank you, Mr.
Moving on our agenda, financial statements. I'm going to leave it to our official financial planner there, James, to let go, see if there's any questions.
Yeah, I mean, just a brief update of what's in there. So it's the standard financial statements, which are straight from our EFS, Enterprise Financial Systems, right? So what comes out of our statements, as well as spreadsheets that show through October, as well as spreadsheets, through of October of this fiscal year, as well as spreadsheets that show from the inception of Measure M. Two noteworthy things that you could note in there is that we have paid our first quarter payments for our LBT, which is our local bus transit category, as well as our LSR, our local roads, quarterly payments to all the jurisdictions. And you also note that revenue continues to be very strong, significantly exceeding our 3% estimates, around the 6-7%.
For the committee, is there any questions, comments about the financial statements? And going along with what Willard's comment is, they are very detailed, and they are by fund and they're by program. And so it does take you a while to kind of get through those, but informative as they are. So again, I appreciate at least the long spreadsheets of the year to date, and also to the cumulative that speak to the revenue. So thank you for that. So moving forward then, no questions. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I see Tom Conlon with his hand up.
Tom, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave that up. I thought I had taken it down.
Okay, great. All right, now we're moving forward. Item 6, the draft of the legislative principles.
Hi, Chair Harder, Suzanne Smith. So included in your agenda packet is an item that's going to the board in December. That is our annual sort of discussion around legislative principles. The purpose of this item, and it's included in your agenda packet on pages 44 and 45, is to get sort of overview, general direction on certain sort of policies or approaches, so that as policy discussions or legislative discussions happen at the state and federal level, staff has some guidance on how to represent our interests and our board in those discussions or deliberations. Oftentimes we follow this up throughout the year with specific bills that are of interest, or maybe of interest to the board, for them to consider supporting or opposing or seeking amendments. So the item before you today is really the sort of introduction of our general policies or principles that relate to both the climate side and the transportation side. So I thought I would share them with you in advance of the board meeting on Monday, the 13th, whenever they meet in December.
Thank you for that. Members of the committee, any comments? Tom?
Thanks again. This is very helpful. I appreciate putting this together and letting us have a peek at this. My general comments on these 2 pages are that we should make sure that we reflect the new vision of the organization, and in particular on the transportation legislative principles. I wanted to see something more about health and safety, which is a top level goal of the organization now, and it just seems like it didn't end up on this list. Does that make sense as a constructive comment, Suzanne? It's intended as such. I mean, I just think it's easy for you guys to be, cranking these things out, and but we probably should make reference to that. And the other concept was the environmental justice and equity concepts. This is very important at the state level right now, and as well as at countywide. And so I would just kind of give it a polish for those 2 points. For example, in the climate change, there is a reference in the A through E bullets, and then the bullet 6 has equitable climate change projects, but we might be a little more specific about that on here. So
That's a good point.
Hope those are helpful.
Yep, thank you. I think Eris has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Tom's comment, because it talks about funding and efficiency and technological innovation, but why do we want more bicycle and pedestrian projects? To make people safer and to save lives. The whole first page talks about the climate change and environmental reasons for doing a lot of the work, but I would like to see a little more about public health and safety, and sort of the why and not just the what. Thanks.
Great. Appreciate that.
Any other comments? I appreciated the document itself. I thought it was great. It gives me, as a chairman of a transportation committee for an organization, great insight as to what we need to do and what we need to track going forward. So I appreciated the effort and the information that you provided. And from there, it gives us some groundwork to move forward ourselves. So thank you for that. Next, someone's going to speak to the infrastructure investment in the Jobs Act for 2021.
Yeah, that's me again, Mr. Chair. So just wanted to run through this brief presentation. You've probably heard a good amount about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I do not have a companion piece on Build Back Better yet, since it has not come out of the Senate, and I feel like, I don't know, let's wait and see if we get a bill before we do that. So this is the legislation that was signed into law. And overall increase in funding of a significant level. I'm going to focus on the surface transportation component of it at first here. So the FAST Act is the companion measure. That was the surface transportation legislation that preceded the Jobs Act. And so the Jobs Act is more than 100% greater funding for surface transportation. California does very well in the bill. In the Bay Area, our funding levels go up, and we have opportunities in the competitive funding programs as well. So that's it, all around good news. Next page. So in California specifically, here are included in your packet. This was part of your packet, so I don't know that I need to go through it word for word, but there are significant increases to the formula funds over the 5-year period included in the bill, including things for EV charging, bridge repair, resilience-focused investments, quite a bit on that, which I think is good news for a whole host of projects, but Highway 37 in particular. There's also the active transportation program and trade corridors program that will see an infusion of funding through the state and regional programs, but it'll come from the federal level. There will need to be some state legislation that helps with the implementation of some of these new programs. So there will be more to come on. There's not a lot of specificity, I guess, yet as to what precisely we can expect. So over the next year or so, 6 months to a year, there will be a lot of discussion with the state legislature about what's needed to implement some of the newer programs or how they will be handled. So in the Bay Area specifically, the good news is the legislation is very well aligned with Plan Bay Area 2050, which was approved by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And the legislation is very friendly to large metro areas like the Bay Area. So that's also good news for us. MTC has identified about 140 billion in grant funding that could fund Bay Area projects. Not all of that is guaranteed at this point. About 100 billion is guaranteed. About 40 billion will still need to go through the appropriations process. This table shows you a comparison between the FAST Act and the Jobs Act in terms of the funding programs and the levels of funding in each program. The Surface Transportation Program and CMAQ, which is the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, STP, you see a pretty significant jump. Those are the two programs that fund the One Bay Area grant that we will be prioritizing, or that we will be programming projects to later next year. So that's exciting to see that jump in revenue there. The top table is transit funding, and very significant increase in transit funding that will come to the region by formula. Then there's this new program, the Carbon Reduction Program. It was a little disappointing to see that the CMAQ program did not increase very much, but this Carbon Reduction Program is new and is similar, we think, to how the CMAQ program will work, but to be determined on how that's going to play out. MTC has these 35 key strategies included in Plan Bay Area about, restoring and maintaining the system, complete streets, clean vehicles, sea level rise. So the federal legislation really ticks off a lot of these same sorts of strategies, or provides funding for similar sorts of strategies. I mentioned the One Bay Area grant, Cycle 3 program. This is just another slide sort of showing how much funding we will expect to see through that for the region. How much SCTA or how much we get, or what our target will be, is still to be determined, but we should know maybe later this year or early next year. We had assumed somewhere around 25 to 30 million. Hopefully it'll be slightly more than that. But again, we will see in the coming months. Just quickly, there are a lot of other really great components to the bill. a lot of money for airports, for ports and waterways, for water, broadband, power infrastructure, and resilience work related to Western water storage and drought issues and environmental remediation. The opportunities that we have with these other programs include improved internet service. It's estimated that there are over 10 million Californians who would be eligible for the benefit provided for internet service. 65 billion to upgrade power infrastructure and increase energy efficiency. That's of particular interest to us on the RCPA side, and how that will work with our existing energy efficiency programs and how we can hopefully expand upon them. There is also money in there for bay restoration and the estuary partnership, and that's great news as well, and hopefully will help with some of the restoration work that needs to happen in San Pablo Bay and around the Highway 37 corridor. And that is it. So happy to try and answer questions, but really just wanted to provide a quick summary of the bill, and we're excited. This is absolutely the biggest infrastructure package we've seen, and it's going to translate to a bunch of jobs and improvements that are going to be helpful and are going to align with our priorities really nicely.
How about questions, comments from the committee, please?
Awesome. Brian.
The matching, the whole matching concept, the fact that we renewed our measure, will that make us better eligible for a lot of these funds moving forward?
And that's where I think the state discussion and the regional discussion is really going to come into play. I think the short answer is yes. It's an interesting sort of balance when you do the federal advocacy, because you don't want to say too much about how much local money you have, because then they think you don't need a big federal program, but we really do. We just need to leverage it. So then the real opportunity comes with the money that flows from the federal program into the state coffers or through MTC, and it's in those competitive programs where having that local money will enable us to leverage the federal money. So the answer is it will be hugely helpful. How exactly? It's less clear today, but I think within the next 6 months it'll become a lot more clear. And the funding program we mentioned earlier, Shauna and James both mentioned, I think the 2021 SCTA funding program, that's going to be the One Bay Area grant program, but also the first few years worth of Go Sonoma money, and how we sort of knit those two things together to leverage more money out of OBAG and active transportation and even trade corridors potentially. That's kind of the art of it that will unfold over the next 6 to 12 months. Steve.
So my question is, do we need to review the 135 projects that are currently in the pipeline and decide which ones we want to focus on during this time of federal generosity?
Well, we did the call for projects, right? And so we have the top 5 projects from each of the jurisdictions and top 5 projects from each of the transit operators. And that totaled well over $230 million. And we think we're going to have about 70 million. So I don't think we need to revisit the list particularly, but I think, we have to figure out from that list, which ones can we, how can we best get to a point where we fund the most of them?
All right, that clarifies things. Thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments?
All right, well, thank you. It's exciting. It's good stuff. Well, I'm sure we'll be back.
I want to thank you for the presentation, the summary, because I haven't been able to find a simplified bullet form, and this was quite helpful to me. I love the comparison of increase over the FAST Act to the Jobs Act. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. It was very clear and precise and the best information I have to date. So thank you very much for that.
Great. Thanks.
Next on the agenda is update on the capital projects report.
So this item's me. You'll notice it has a name change. It's no longer called the Highway Report. We're recommending moving forward with the Capital Projects Report. So I'll start out with Highway 101 as usual, where we're heading northbound Thursday morning about 5 a.m. You'll see a continuous carpool lane through all of Sonoma County from the county line to Windsor. So that last segment northbound through Petaluma will open up Thursday morning just before dawn. And then all that'll be left is to open up the southbound segment about a year from now in late 2022, and we'll have a fully functioning carpool lanes in Sonoma County. Part of the reason for wanting to transition this report from the Highways Report to the Capital Projects Report is something I do want to point out based on previous discussion at this meeting, where we do have an expenditure plan that has significantly changed with regard to highway. So as you can see, your Highway 101 program within Measure M was 40% of the sales tax measure, whereas Go Sonoma is 0% of the measure. It does not have a Highway 101 program associated with it. Like I said, we're going to be done with Highway 101 widening end of next year, and we are all funded for that work. With regard to the other categories, you can see them: move traffic and improve safety, smooth and maintain road, bus transit, bikeways and pathways, all had significant increases to address our comprehensive transportation plan goals that have been approved by our board. So with that in mind, that we've talked about a couple times at this meeting, our 2021 SCTA funding program. It's a program of about $70 million that we expect to increase based on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, specifically the OBAG 3 component, which is the first component of the funding plan that we're trying to put together. The list of projects did go to the Citizens Advisory Committee in October because we did have to program the STIP funds, the State Transportation Improvement Program funds for that. With that, moving forward, we'll update you on capital projects to make sure that you know what's happening within the county and the multiple fund sources that the SCTA works on. I do want to point out to you, since we met last, there's 2 applications that went in for what's called the RAISE grant, which is a federal grant. Previously was called BUILD. Previous to that was called TIGER. Sonoma County had 2 applications. One application was for SMART. The other application was for the Hearn Avenue interchange. Both of those applications were unsuccessful. And if you would like to study more on, oh, that's the wrong link. That's the link to the Go Sonoma. I will put a link in the chat so you can see the types of projects that are being approved through the RAISE grant, and you'll see that they need to be significantly overmatched and very multimodal type projects to have a chance at being successful in that highly competitive grant program. With that, it concludes my capital projects report.
Thank you, James. So does that mean that Hearn Avenue is unfunded still?
That is correct. It's partially unfunded to the tune of around $10 to $12 million, depending on what the final estimates come in.
Any suggestions on how one might be able to move forward with that project?
Well, we're meeting with Santa Rosa tomorrow to talk about all of their projects within the 2021 funding program. We've met with all the jurisdictions to make sure that we understand their applications clearly and are giving them a chance to make sure that they got them right in the proper order. We're not modifying the list in any way. We're just verifying it for accuracy. As part of those discussions, we'll be discussing it Probably the most immediate low-hanging fruit would be the next round of a local partnership competitive program, which is one of the SB1 competitive programs that will most likely have a call for projects later in 2022.
Thank you. Any other comments for James and the capital projects? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and next, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Steve Bertelbaugh just raised his hand.
Steve?
Yes, my understanding is that the active transportation program was going to get an infusion of money, state money, but that it collapsed at the last minute. Do we have any idea about whether that program is going to get additional funding in January, or what do we know about how that's going to play out?
Yeah, so we don't know is the short answer, but based on those legislative principles and the fact that we do have another round of budget surplus, there's a good chance that could come back. And if it does come back, the recommendation to date has been to fund those projects that were part of the last ATP funding cycle, of which we had 2 projects that ranked just below the cut line. The county TPW had a job on Moreland, and then Healdsburg had a project as well. So, we would advocate for those projects to be funded with any new infusion of funds, as well as supplementing the next round of ATP that will go through the CTC first for the state pot of ATP funding, California Transportation Commission for the state pot of active transportation funds, and then that moves to a regional pot for the MTC's pot of active transportation funds.
Cross our fingers. Thank you.
All righty. Any more comments? Otherwise, we're moving forward. We're losing people because of the lateness of the hour, but it's all good. Attached is the draft of the SCTA's next board meeting agenda. Thank you for the addition. Thank you for the suggestion for the addition. Announcements. Mr. Levin, you added a link there. Did you want to have a comment about it?
I don't think I need to say much. It was an article I saw from the New York Times about the increasing popularity of roundabouts and why they're a good thing and why some of the objections to them are unfounded. We are seeing more of them here in locally. We've just heard a presentation earlier today about the plan for the 116, 121 intersection. Rohnert Park, I know, is putting a roundabout at the west end of Southwest. Katati, unfortunately, is not going to have roundabouts because the citizens, for some reason, object to them. Voted.
There are a few of us who are behind the scenes working to overturn that.
I see. Well, this might be some good information for you, but I just suggested it might be of interest to the committee.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any other announcements?
Steve Bertelbaugh, is your hands? Is this the new one or from the previous item?
That was previous. Sorry to not lower my hand.
I had a brief announcement. I just put it in the chat. There's a big new draft presentation that came out from the Sustainable Growth Council. They funded under AB 285 what's called the Comprehensive Transportation Assessment. And they've identified, UC Berkeley and a few other researchers have identified a big gap between what we're saying we're doing and what we're actually doing in transportation funding. And I recommend everybody take a look at the draft report.
All right. Any other comments, announcements? If not, our next meeting is scheduled for January 31st, 2022. And other than that, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone, and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Dennis.
Holidays, everybody.
Thank you.